Hosea chapter 8 tonight. We're going to begin our study of this chapter. I think we can make some pretty good headway tonight. And just passed out outlines if you didn't get one. Here you go, Gal. Got an extra. Let you have my extra one up here. And we'll get started. In this chapter, as we continue through the main section, the second main point of our main outline, Israel's ungodliness. Tonight we're going to look at God's judgment on Israel. Now, I want to begin with a question. Why does God have the right to judge mankind? Exactly right, Sister Dusty. Because God created us. We are the lesser, He is the greater. He is our creator, we the created. And as such, He has the right, the authority to rule us, to govern us, to make commands, rules, laws, regulations for us. And as such, we are all accountable to Him. And would we not say that the Bible is filled with affirmation after affirmation that God does judge? And that He has judged? And we're going to see that tonight. And ultimately, He will judge us one day. You know, when at the day of judgment, the final judgment that is to come, in which all will receive the sentence of either eternal life in heaven or eternal perdition in hell. But the question then, second question, as we build the foundation for our study, what makes God's judgments different than the judgments mankind often renders? He's impartial. That's first of all exactly right, Brother Ricky. He's all-knowing. We'll go with that's the simple way of saying it. He knows all things. So He is impartial, no respecter of person. He knows all things. What else could we add to that? He made the laws. And His laws are righteous. His actions are righteous. And certainly God is a just God, is He not? Can we ever blame God? Does God ever do anything wrong? Absolutely not. And I think there's a principle that all mankind needs to understand that helps us understand the nature of God's judgment. And it's one of the foundational passages on your outline, 2 Corinthians 5, verse 10, in which will help us as we go through our study tonight. You know, when Paul talks about the judgment that is to come there in that particular passage, when we're all going to stand before the judgment seat of Christ. Now, what does this text tell us? What do we learn from this text that tells us that God's judgments are impartial, that they are fair, and that man has no right to complain? How are we going to be judged? According to our works. God, we're going to be judged according to the deeds that we've done in our body, whether good or bad. And again, and it's against the standard of God's word, which is the truth, His rule book for mankind. And so now, with that in mind, why is it that God would come down on Israel so harshly? And indeed, we're going to see the severity of the judgment that was to come here in these 14 verses. Why then would God do that? Why such a harsh sentence upon upon Israel?
He created them all as free will people, so it was of their own accord.
It was their own accord.
That they didn't follow His laws. They had no one to blame but themselves for the shape and ring.
And I think that's exactly what we're going to see in this study, Sister Dusty. Is that they're going to reap what they've sown. They chose to disobey God, and that's what we're going to. And I think that's one of the lessons we're going to see in our study is that if mankind dies in a lost condition, he has no one to blame but himself, does he? If man chooses to reject God, he has no one to blame for himself, and we're going to see that with Israel. So tonight, as we look at Hosea 8, there's two main sections when you look at your outline. Verses 1 through 7, let's begin with this. And we're going to look at the pronunciation of judgment. And that takes in the first half of the chapter. When we come to verse 8, we'll see the second half when God explains. And he doesn't leave man in the dark as to why it was going to happen. We see the explanation for that judgment. But if someone would, let's go ahead and read verse number 1 to begin with.
Set the trumpet to the mouth, he shall come as an eagle against the house of the Lord, because they have transgressed my covenant and trespassed against my law.
Thank you, Brother Larry. Here we have the announcement against Israel. And first of all, you see the alarm. Set the trumpet to thy mouth. Now, what was the purpose of a trumpet? Call to attention. You know, could we not also to sound an alarm as well? Bring to one's attention, an alarm. Again, getting a little bit off course now. When Christ comes again, what is going to sound? The last trump. So that ties in right here. Going to call everyone to attention. It's the alarm that the end is here. And certainly a trumpet that was sounded in ancient times would signal a major event was about to transpire. Now the idea here is that God commands Hosea to sound out the alarm that trouble was coming for Israel. Now, does this literally mean that he was going to blow a trumpet? Or was he to be as a trumpet and sound the alarm?
He sounded it all the time.
Yeah. And again, I think here what we're seeing is, further urgency here. I don't know if I put the verse on your outline. A similar construction, similar command is given to the prophet Isaiah in Isaiah 58 verse 1. That's another verse you may want to look at in your personal Bible study when God told him to cry aloud and to lift up his voice like a trumpet. And again, the prophets, as God's watchmen, were sent by God to warn his sinful people of his coming judgments. And as the sound of a trumpet would startle a slumbering people, so God would have the warning sounded out by the prophets, to rouse the people out of their sinful state. And again, we are watchmen today as well. We must warn others about the terrible nature and consequences of sin. And certainly we must sound the alarm against false doctrines, and we must sound the alarm against immorality. And we must warn people that it is a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God. And and that's what people don't recognize today, is it? God, it is a fearful thing to fall into God's hands if we're unprepared. Because what's going to happen? Well, it's going to be terrible punishment. He's going to pronounce judgment and wrath, and that judgment pronounced against us will not be good. So we need to sound the alarm so that people can recognize their sinful condition and be brought to Christ and come to Christ. Now look at the instrument here as well in verse 1. He shall come as an eagle against the house of the Lord. And again, what does the eagle bring to mind? Swiftness. And agility. The instrument of God's wrath would come with the speed and strength of an eagle. And this instrument would be the armies of Assyria. And it's interesting as well, as I was reading up on for this study, the Assyrian symbol that they carried with them into battle, on their flag, their symbol was an eagle. So you have possible two things going on here. The eagle, the idea here, the swiftness, the agility that was coming, the strength by which this was going to come about, and certainly the illusion that it would be the Assyrians. And both of those ideas, mesh together, go together here. And the phrase house of the Lord here obviously doesn't refer to the temple. The temple was in Jerusalem. Here it refers to Israel, the nation. Now, why is this going to happen? According to the last portion of this verse. They had transgressed. They had broken the law. And they refused to repent. And as such, well, they rejected God's long-suffering, and now they were going to experience God's wrath. Let's look at verse number 2 now, if someone would read that. And here we find Israel, the audacity of Israel. Let's look at this.
Israel shall cry unto me, my God, we know thee.
Thank you, Sister Dusty. Oh, look at this verse. Now, what's Israel doing here? They're trying to escape God's punishment. Now, and this would happen when the Assyrian armies were spotted. Israel would cry unto God with the claim that they knew Him. But did they? But how were they living? How were they conducting themselves? They weren't keeping His commandments, and yet they claimed, and yet here they are claiming, "We know you, God." You know, and was this not an attempt to sort of get themselves out of the situation? They knew they were in a pickle, as it were. And so here now they're going to try once again. God, we know thee. Don't let this happen to us. But again, they had lived in open and blatant defiance to God's will. Thus, when judgment came, deliverance would be too late. And the mere fact they uttered God's name was of no consequence. And you would note on your outline that I've put several other verses on there. And I think those are New Testament passages that certainly tie in with what we see here. Is it the fact today that many claim to know God? That they profess God with their lips? When they get in a pickle. But does that make it factual in the sight of God? Yeah.
That's in their head, and they think no matter what they've done, when times get bad, they can just call on the name of the Lord and be liable away.
And they fail to see what it means to call upon the name of the Lord.
Lack of knowledge again.
Yep, lack of knowledge. And again, and Brother Ricky, we're going to see that principle yet again in this chapter. I think we've emphasized it. The key verse is chapter 4, verse 6, lack of knowledge. And again, we know God if we keep His commandments, according to what John wrote in 1 John 2, verse 3. There's nothing complex about that. And if people would just simply study God's Word for themselves, they would know what God expects of them, would they not? That's all they have to do is open the Bible with an honest heart and just study. Study it for themselves. Don't take the Word. And again, that's the problem we face today. Too many people taking the word of a preacher rather than the word of God, rather than being like the noble Bereans. And so we can profess God all we want with our lips, but if it's not backed by our obedience, it's not going to do us any good. And that's what Israel tried to claim. And we see their audaciousness here. And it was not going to work out for them, just as those today who claim to know God, their claim will not work out for them in the day of judgment. And again, on your outline, I point you to Matthew 7, 21 through 23. All right, having seen that now, we turn our attention to verses 3 through 7, and we look at the actions and the consequences that these actions brought to Israel. And if someone would, let's go ahead and read verses 3 through 7 now.
Silver and their gold have they made them idols, that they may be cut off. A calf
Thank you, Brother Larry. And so you notice verse number 3. And again here, God tells them, you're not going to get deliverance because what had they done according to verse 3? They'd rejected God, cast off. And that's the idea here. It's to reject, to turn aside from, to forsake God. And it's the idea here, they were treating God as if he were nothing more than a worn-out garment. And what do you do with a worn-out garment? You cast it off. And that's what Israel was treating God like a worn-out garment. Like that, we don't need God anymore. And isn't that the way the majority of people living today have treated God? Like a garment that you don't need anymore, not fit to be worn, not fit to be used, and just, cast out.
They want him when they're sick and when they're dying.
What's that?
They want him when they're sick and when they're
Exactly. They want him on their terms. Not at all times. And again, it's, in the bad times, we've got to have God, but in times of prosperity, I don't need him. Don't need him. And again, that's what Israel, see the same thing with Israel here. When they saw the Assyrians coming, we need you, God. We know you. That ain't going to work out. And as such, God's going to turn them over to the hands of their enemies. And the Assyrians who would pursue Israel. And again, God, this would be with the blessing of God, would it not? God was going to allow Assyria to deal with Israel. And again, we're seeing the consequences of sin. And then you look at verse 4. Look what they had done. And I find the first phrase, they have set up kings, but not by me. They have made princes, and I knew it not. Now, what do you think this is alluding to? Exactly. Would this go back, do you think this would go all the way back to the request they made of Samuel there? Remember 1 Samuel 8?
Well, in this go, is it Jeroboam that they chose to be king? Is it Jeroboam when they
Yeah.
spread?
When he rebelled, when Rehoboam made that foolish request, when Rehoboam tried to bind heavy burden on the people, wouldn't listen to the wise men, Jeroboam was picked to lead the rebellion, and as such, he became the first king. Look how that turned out.
Did they pick him instead of God's chosen?
And when we look at the kingdom of Israel, here's your pop quiz. Was there any righteous king in the northern kingdom? Beginning with Jeroboam down to the end. Maybe a little tricky. What's that, sister? No. Now, was there any righteous kings to the south in Judah? Yes. So that was that's the difference. Here you see the problem Israel had as the northern kingdom began right at the outset of the kingdom's division. Every king in Israel, northern kingdom, promoted idolatry and all other sorts of sinful behavior. And is it surprising then that the nation plunged deeper and deeper into sin and moved further away from God?
Were there any kings in the southern kingdom that, was it like passed from father to son all the way down, or kinfolks? The northern kingdom, this would have killed that one off, and he's been a king, and then they'd have another fight, and somebody else, it'd be a whole different lineage.
Yeah, they would have. In the south, it was like that.
So it was like that too in the southern kingdom?
It was more passed from father to son in the southern kingdom, if I'm not mistaken. And it's amazing to look at the southern kingdom that some of these righteous kings, such as Hezekiah, they were the sons of wicked kings, and yet they chose not to follow in the footsteps of their father. Hezekiah, he came after Ahaz. Look, Ahaz was wicked. But does that, just because the father was wicked, does it mean the son had to be wicked? No. We all make our own choices. And certainly we see those good, righteous kings, but we don't see that in the northern kingdom. And as such, they reached the point of no return. So you look at here in verse 4, the latter portion. They set up their own kings, and of their silver and gold they erected idols. And this takes us through verse 6. And the idols, obviously, the material, gold and silver. And it was by these creations that Israel had cut herself off from God. And what had God told Israel at the very outset? What was one of the 10 commandments? Thou shalt have no other gods before me, and there shall not be any graven images. But yet, what happened there at Sinai as soon as they got the law? Immediately they had idol problems when Aaron made them that golden calf. Well, while Moses was up in the mountain. Yeah, Moses knew it. Moses was receiving the law. People decided they don't know what happened to Moses, so they wanted that golden calf. That troubled them, and that troubled them throughout their history, did it not?
Well, the Lord knew He's going to make these calves when He told them up to.
Yeah. And again, remember we talked about Sunday night. God knows, but it doesn't mean He causes us to make the choices, does it? We choose these things. And certainly that's the point here. Verse 5, Israel's gods were of her own making. Again, look at the phrase, thy calf, O Samaria, in verse number 5. And again, God's pointing out here the fundamental problem. When there is any deviation, when there is departure, when there is distortion of His plan and pattern for acceptable worship, it comes from man, not God. Again, doesn't this not apply to God's plan of salvation today? When it's taught that baptism is not essential to salvation, that's not of God, is it? That's from man. That's a commandment of men. That's a doctrine of men. And certainly Israel here distorted the worship that God had ordained for them to engage in. And obviously they changed the object of worship from God to these idols. And as we noted, it was Aaron who made it at Sinai, and Jeroboam who introduced idolatry at Dan and Bethel. And it was the workmen of Israel then who continued to churn them out. And Samaria, interestingly enough, I do want to point this out. Just going through my study, what archaeology tells us, and certainly archaeology I found has revealed some findings about these idols. And when a high ridge in the hill country of northern Samaria was excavated, this was right around, I believe, 1990. Sometime in the late 80s, very early 1990s, its excavator, a man by the name of Mazar and his team found a 7-inch long bronze statue of a bull that was worshipped in Samaria. And it's in Mazar's opinion, that bull was reminiscent of the golden calf described in the Bible, and more likely than not was used by Israelite settlers in this region of the northern Samarian hills. Now, I did want to put that in to show you what some of the efforts of archaeologists have found, especially as it relates to the problem of idolatry. And in this particular region, in Samaria. So that corresponds here with Hosea 8 and verse number 5. They worship cattle, and of course they believe in reincarnation and everything, You might come back as an animal, according to Hinduism. But you're right, the cow is a sacred animal in Hinduism. And a lot of these Mideastern religions worship animals too.
They still eat them?
What's that?
They still eat them after worship?
I believe they do, Ricky, but don't quote me on that. I believe they do. But certainly these are not the God of heaven. And certainly to prove these gods were not God, Jehovah God Himself would cause them to be broken in pieces. And certainly the foolishness and inadequacy idolatry is demonstrated in these two verses. And it would be driven home to Israel when they would be carried away into captivity. That's when they would finally learn that idolatry did not pay. Is when they were taken from their homeland, deported, and carried away captive. Now, verse number 7, this may be and I would suggest a lot of people have heard this verse as well. This is probably second most known verse in the entire book. Is there a passage in the New Testament that harkens to this similar principle? Uses different terminology, but certainly affirms same principles. Be not deceived, Paul wrote. God is not mocked, for whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. And that's the passage on the outline. And again, that's God's law of sowing and reaping. And God put it into effect, did he not? And again, it's true in the natural realm. When you plant a garden, when you plant corn seeds, do you expect to get tomatoes? Is that what you should expect to receive if you sow corn seed? Well, obviously not. If you sow corn, you're going to reap corn. Again, same's true with the Word of God. If you sow the Word of God, it's going to produce Christians. Here we see this principle in a very negative connotation. And the idea of sowing to the wind here is proverbial language denoting lost or futile labor, empty labor, vain labor. And that's what engaging in such labor would prove to be. And, tie this in. I don't think I put the passage on your outline. Mark on there Ecclesiastes 5 and verse 16, where it talks about those that labor for the wind will find no profit in such. So mark that. You cannot sow the wind in the soil, nor can seed take root in the wind. That's common sense, I think. However, Israel tried it, and as a result of sowing to the wind, sowing to nothingness, well, what were they going to reap? Destruction, the whirlwind, and or tornado of destruction. And again, they would reap far more than they had sown, and that is true, is it not, in both the good and negative sense, as we alluded to from Galatians 6 a while ago. And if we sow to the flesh, we'll reap corruption. However, if we sow to the Spirit, we understand what will happen there, life eternal. And also, there would also be a literal ramification in all of this for Israel, because what we also see here from the prophet depicts a devastating failure of the crops. And the stalk would produce no head. Talking about the grain. And if they did manage to form a head, there would be no grain therein. However, if grain happened to be produced, well, in this context, we're told that strangers or foreigners, and I believe in this particular context, and I think it fits the context, that the strangers here refers to the Assyrians, the armies that would march through the land, that would destroy the land, that would devour their crops in their destruction and takeover of Israel. And so what we see here in verse number 7, on the part of Israel, their efforts to try to do things their way. And again, we emphasize this, doing things their way. Man would do well to recognize this lesson today. Would prove to be what? If you try to do things your own way rather than God's, how's that going to turn out? It's not going to turn out well at all. It's going to be empty. It's going to be vanity. It's going to be useless. And it brought disastrous consequences for Israel. And it'll bring disastrous consequences for man today, will it not? Trying to do things their way, his way rather than God's. And so this first section then deals with God's pronunciation on Israel. Now, we're going to put a peg there, but in our study of the second half, if we had more time, I would go ahead and get into it, but we only have like 4 or 5 minutes left. I don't want to really get into the start of it here, but in verses 8 through 14, which we'll deal with next week, we're going to see God's explanation for this judgment. And again, what we want to see is that when God pronounces judgment, He doesn't leave man in the dark as to why it's going to occur. And in particular, why He brings about His punishment for sin. Because He's going to spell it out for Israel. And that's what we'll see next week when we look at verses 8 through 14.